background and introduce our panelists, and just give a little bit of your background and your locations. And then we can get right into the questions, which will get more deeply into your background and how your martial arts systems how they were founded, how they've been evolving, and what you foresee in the future for their development and your legacies. And it's something that's absorbed me a lot in just reflecting on my own martial arts involvement. And if I had the distinction of you gentlemen having done so much and for so long and developed things sometimes from scratch and from, well, I guess it's never from scratch, but with various influences, and how that's carried into the future has been on my mind. And I hope you can answer some of those questions. So we'll start with you, Professor Ashanti. And let me ask you first, is it okay if I call you by your first name, sir?
Oh, please.
We'll go by a first name.
Yeah, thank you.
I've gotten your titles out it'll probably save us several minutes if I just avoid going through the whole title. But
Yeah.
Alessandro, tell us about Full Circle Jiu-Jitsu and how you created it and what your thinking was in creating it.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a creation of style as much as it was a container for the students. I had a falling out with my sensei, and I was left sort of in a really weird position where, given his style, how we taught, there wasn't really an avenue to join other places given what I was taught. So it really was an avenue to actually protect the students politically as well. Since I was going through some particular fallout, I didn't want to have them experience the same thing. So I sort of created an organization that allowed them to just train, and since I was kind of an expert at dealing with the higher up level stuff, I didn't want them to have any bleed out through that. So I kept them separate from everything that was going on with me. And that was how Full Circle Jiu-Jitsu was born. About 2006 or so. No, 2002 is when that happened. Yeah.
And that was it integrated what existing styles of jiu-jitsu. You're, as part of the AJA, I know you've got a strong Budishin traditional background. What kind of went into that?
Well, actually, I'm not a member of Budishin. Actually, I came out of the Sanukas Ryu Jiu-Jitsu lineage. So very, very East Coast, very New York City. So my sensei was Master Shaka Zulu, and he was also a karate master as well. So we're talking about the Moses Powell lineage and the Professor Visitacion lineage on top of that. So Professor B. So with that, it was always a very sort of urban self-defense style of jiu-jitsu that I came from, and that sort of continues to this day. Other influences that come into play are the much more traditional influences of my experiences with Ki Aikido, for instance, and sort of just the general approach in which we approach courtesy and approach protocol as well too. So that's kind of who we are, in an extent. However, just the same, we're very adaptable to things that come into my point of view, and other styles that I've studied as well. Though I try not to make it very sort of chop-socky. We're doing this, we're doing that. I just sort of make it one unified system.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Al, you and I have talked at great length about the different influences that went into Hanguk Musul, and Hanguk Musul itself is it's not generic as sort of not a negative way of putting it, but the term means Korean martial arts, and you've managed to incorporate the harder and the softer aspects of some traditional Korean arts and came up with a tremendously rigorous system that I still, of course, working with you in, and very clearly laid out in copious texts and videos. What went into your creation of Hanguk Musul, and what were your influences?
Well, I was fortunate enough to train with a lot of the early pioneers of some of these martial arts and masters from the 60s. I think most people heard of General Che. He was an army general. He started Taekwondo. And so looking back then, I got to study the old karate-based styles of Taekwondo. And then just by happen chance, I got my first exposure to Hapkido under my master Cha Si-young, who was very accomplished in Taekwondo, but also his other passion was Hapkido. And that kind of changed things. I thought I knew what I wanted to do until I started hitting the mat. And then I learned that I really enjoyed it and was very good at the grappling aspects of it. And that became very important to me, and put a big emphasis on that. So, and then during the course of about 10 years of study under this master, I did a lot of research with him and a few of his associates to learn more about the history, which took you down all kinds of rabbit holes, because there's a lot of national pride. And then until you come to realize that most of the influences were from Japanese karate, Okinawa, and of course, Tapkido was the Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, based on the teachings of Takeda Sensei.
Mhm.
And so that was my foundation. But when my master retired, after I had been with him, I was like his #1 student, and I was kind of crushed when he retired. And but I also knew of another master I had met, and it was kind of a blessing because he had a wide variety of knowledge and skill sets. And I got to learn a lot of things I would have never went to. Back in those days, you were very loyal to your teacher. I would have never went to any other teacher. So he studied in a Buddhist monastery for about 12 years in Korea, and he learned a composite system of Southern, Northern, and indigenous Korean Buddhist style martial arts. And that was very mind blowing because I never learned that kind of stuff before. And so that became a big part of what I do and what I teach. So I kind of put it all together for organization purposes, which I thought were important. And we did training manuals, videos, and things like that just to document it. And here we are today in 2022. And, it's like, we've come a long way. Things today are a lot more informal on my end because I'm kind of quasi-retired. But that's in it, kind of in a nutshell. Just being able to talk to some of the old-time masters, some of the real big names in martial arts, and getting the straight skinny on a lot of this stuff, which you won't read about in a lot of Black Belt magazine articles and stuff, because like I said, there's a lot of national pride, and sometimes it gets in the way. So we kind of cut through all the BS and come up with a pretty good system, I think, that gives you a wide variety of skill sets, background, and knowledge. And if that's my contribution to the martial arts, that's going to be it.
Yeah. And you and I have talked at great length about this, the history of Korea and Japan being what it is, and pretty stressful and problematic at certain points. There's a lot of self-definition by Korean martial artists and founders of systems to distinguish themselves from Japanese, while at the same time taking very strongly from Japanese influences. And that's a fascinating story in and of itself. George, maybe you can tell us, your story is probably well known to many of the people on the call, but if you want to fill us in, and I know you've got the Seki request to organize a system.
Right. There's actually two things that happened. One had to do with Buddhishin Jiu-Jitsu, the naming itself. We took over the Burbank Y Dojo from another of Seki Sensei, and within a year or two, we had 2 mats going, 40, 50 students. It was like, I'd like to be able to go back to that. But anyway, the program became so popular, people started asking, what system of jiu-jitsu are you teaching? And of course, Seki's attitude was, there's only jiu-jitsu. So Bill Fromm and I came up with the name Buddhishin, which basically means to conduct oneself with honor and respect. And we went to Seki with it, and he said, well, as long as you don't put the word "ru" in there, it's okay. And so we started saying, people started asking us, well, our answer was, well, we teach Buddhishin Jiu-Jitsu. But I still believe Jiu-Jitsu is Jiu-Jitsu. Once you get beyond the terminology in English or Japanese and slight differences in technique execution, you can put a bunch of brown and black belts in Jiu-Jitsu together, and they can work out amazingly well together. And to me, that's one of the real niceties of the art. In any event, with the videos and books that came along later, I think that sort of established Buddhishin Jiu-Jitsu as a system. With respect to the AJA, when Bill Fromm moved back east, Seki came to me and says, you two really need to find a way to keep in touch with each other. So the final outcome was the American Jiu-Jitsu Association, which was a real challenge with the IRS. But fortunately, we had a good IRS agent. She was absolutely fantastic. And It took 2 or 3 years to get approved. And for those of you who don't know how governmental agencies work, the IRS has its own internal court system. She said the problem is the way they're interpreting, I think it's the 1968 Sports Act, any organization that applies as an athletic organization will be denied. So she says, we're just waiting for a court interpretation that says it's good. So it took about 2 or 3 years, and I got a call at 6 o'clock in the morning one day, and she says, George, just want you to know that we've approved your 501c3 status. We got a good interpretation from the IRS court, and we're going with that. So it makes you wonder sometimes how federal agencies function, but
Dysfunction.
this is America. So in any case, that's how the AJA came about. So they were two entirely different things. Bill and I made the decision right at the outset that we would not make the AJA exclusively a Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu organization. And that was one of the real pluses that the IRS liked, that we were open to any martial arts style. And anyway, so that's about it in a nutshell.
Very interesting. Yeah. A lot of moving parts with those organizations, founding Budoshin, and then as having done the AJA stuff for so long now, you see the organizational sophistication that goes into that, and I think you've been successful.
And the leadership in the AJA is really solid. I don't always agree with it, but my attitude has always been, it doesn't matter whether you agree with a person or not, it's whether or not you respect them. And I've always had a great deal of respect for the people that are in the AJA and running it, because one thing I've always avoided in life are yes people. I don't like people that simply agree with me to agree with me. So
Right. Yeah, that's critical. Mark, maybe you could do a brief introduction of the and when I say American cane system, I'm prejudiced in favor of that, given that that's what I'm focusing on. But you've also founded other branches. You've had the cane evolve in different areas of exercise for senior citizens and flexibility development and helping veterans. Maybe you could just tell us how you got into all this and got into cane.
Gosh, where do you start? I started in martial arts back in the late 60s when I got out of the Army. The reason I even got into martial arts, I used to work out at Jack LaLanne's, showing my age now. And one day, me and my buddy went into class, and everybody's sitting in front of the mirrors flexing, and that's not what I joined weightlifting for, was to flex myself in the mirror and stuff and show off. So me and my buddy went around to 6 different dojos and ended up with the Chuck Norris system. Never done any martial arts before that. I was doing boxing and wrestling before that. And I was a little kid. I got a bully, and he picked on me, and I was on the ground. I said, this will never happen to me again. And I started boxing with my best friend's dad. He was Golden Gloves, and he taught me how to fight. But then going on from that, what happened was I was visiting my brother. This is about 35 years ago in Palm Springs, and 3 ladies over the age of 75 were brutally raped, and 2 of them had canes. And my brother goes, this happens all the time. And I just slapped me in the face. I was, getting pretty good. I've been in the martial arts for about 40 years. And I just couldn't believe that what was going on with the senior citizens. So I started checking on the canes, and then nobody had what I would call a good cane. In fact, back in those days, the crook would have barely fit around my wrist. But that's what we had to learn with. And then when I found out that, I started checking into to people that taught the cane, and we had canes and systems, but no system on the cane, the crook cane. Everything was a straight cane. So I started doing everything with the crook. That was back in the early 90s. And my focus was on going after seniors. And I'm still doing that now, but I went through the martial arts. I've been a martial artist so long. And trying to get the stuff out there, which amazed me. I thought this would be an easy one. I started making canes because they didn't make any good canes. That's a different story. I sold that section of my company. It was called Cane Masters. It's pretty well known around the world now, and just making the canes. And I just started hitting everybody, going after mainly martial arts, because that's what I was, but I'm turning over to the seniors, and now I'm just trying to get the seniors. Tax on seniors are up over 75%. And the hardest person to sell a cane to is a senior. It's going to make me look old and weak. I go, you're already old. Get over that part and you won't be weak. I'll show you 2 techniques that'll make you stand up straight. But it's an easy thing to use. You can carry it anywhere in the world. They can't ask you why, because it's a medical device. Once you use the word self-defense or anything like that, the security can take that cane away from you. So I really push on my students, don't say it's for self-defense or anything like that. It's just strictly a medical device and for personal protection. Now, a lot of guys go, personal protection, I mean fighting. I go, no, that's walking up a staircase, walking down a staircase, learning how to walk with a cane and balance. So I'm kind of using words that I get away with without having them take the cane away. And the biggest sale point on the cane is you can get on an airplane first.
Hey, yeah, that's right. You have to get a little preference there.
That's the easy way to say what I've done. But I started like I have at that time, Master Norris was teaching Tong Sudo, then I went to Taekwondo, then Hapkido, and Hapkido is where I picked up. Yeah, I had to do 10 cane techniques to go for my 3rd degree back in the 80s, and of course I passed my test. I took the cane, threw it in the closet, because why would I need me being a 3rd degree, at least a 3rd degree, I was a higher in some other styles, but why would I have to carry a cane? And then 10 years later, it popped up, and here I am. That's all I do now. The last 30 years, just with cane work.
Terrific. Very interesting. Yeah, the sensitivity of such words as weapon, cane as weapon is that's a limiter in some ways to the common use of a cane. If you're certainly getting on an airplane or trying to access different places with the cane as a mobility device, it's terminology can be very important there. And
well, these new guys that are playing with the cane, they're going to screw everything up, because they're just talking about how great a tool it is, because you can get it going 300 miles an hour in a half a second, and they're going to make it so you have to have a permit to carry a cane like it was back in the 1300s. It's crazy, but this is my opinion.
Well, and yeah, I hope to get into that later. There's controversy about the nature of the cane, the issue of having. I thought I had a cane nearby me with a sharpened horn, but many of Mark's all of the videos that I've seen of yours, and probably a lot of the canes sold by Cane Masters and that you've made, have a pointed horn that is clearly has tremendous potential as a self-defense device and in a dangerous situation. But on the other hand, it sort of identifies it as not a weapon, but as something that's intended for clearly self-defense use.
Keep away dogs and cats and squirrels.
Right. So it can be pretty a subtle thing with lots of important dimensions. But yeah, the cane as mobility device that can be employed when needed for self-defense, I think is a brilliant aspect of the system. And anyway, we'll get more into that later. We'll move on to the next question, which is, Alessandro, maybe you could tell us the main focus of your style. And we've been touching on it with Mark. There's the nature of flexibility and exercise that you can use with a cane, but there's also self-defense. And
yeah,
how about full circle jiu-jitsu? What's your focus?
Well, Full Circle, it's funny. That was actually the name of my first school, was Full Circle Dojo. So that's actually where the name came out of. I tried to resist that for a very long time, but it just wouldn't go away. So we just stuck with it instead. Really, I always say, like, we train for this, but why are we here so often? Why are we in the pursuit of perfection? Perfection is kind of an impossible thing. So what is it? It's the journey that keeps us going. And it's the journey where the reward exists on top of that. So basically, we're a self-defense school at the end of the day, but at the same time, we're a place to come where, you don't have any devices in front of you. You're not driving a car. You're not stressed about work. All those things go away. You're free to work on being your best during the time that you're here. And that's basically the focus of our dojo, is to be the best self you can possibly be, but also, really learn how to protect yourself at the same time.
Excellent. Al, I know there's clearly there's self-defense as a key element of Hanguk Musul. But there's with the Qigong dimension that you promote, there's a huge self-betterment and flexibility and meditative quality. Maybe you can tell us about that focus or the entire focus.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, you know, I was extremely focused when I first started studying martial arts and Taekwondo, and then I got my first exposure to being thrown on a mat, getting the wind knocked out of me, and appreciation for that. But later, I started getting glimpses of health practices called Qigong that the master was using, and I became very intrigued by it. And he told me, particularly as you get older in the martial arts, if you really want to go to distance, you need to put more of an emphasis on the internal aspects of it. So a lot of things were focused on the physical aspects, the external, but it was the internal that we didn't see that much of. So I started doing a little more research into that, and I saw the benefits right away. My movements were smoother. I felt healthier. I stopped catching the common colds and the flu and all the other crap. And I saw firsthand and appreciated it. So that's a real big part. But as I learned more about it, I also found out that in the ancient times, the meditation and the healing arts, they were all part of the martial arts. They weren't separate. But today, as you know, everything's departmentalized. But I try to went back to what the roots were about being a total martial artist, being the best you can be, and being able to fight with all the different realms of internal, external, as well as weapons. And of course, the common thread was the breath control, the breathing exercises, meditation. Those are all the things that ancient warriors turned to really enhance their lives and their arts, if that answers your question. And you disappeared. There you are.
I was off grabbing a couple canes to talk about later. Thank you very much, Al. That's terrific. Yeah, that's been hugely influential for me as someone who trains with you. Particularly as we get older. I'm 55. Most of you are a bit older than I am, but the relevance of martial arts to not only purely to self-defense situations, which I've been lucky enough never to have to defend myself physically on the street, but the other side of it being relevance to overall self-betterment and health, and having that be something that's a daily concern and relevant to everything we do, not to isolated situations where we hope to avoid getting into physical confrontations, but that whole other side can be incredibly helpful. George, what self-defense clearly is a major focus of Budishin Jiu-Jitsu, but maybe you could tell us about that. There's a competitive side that I've once in a while been involved in, where you might demonstrate your mastery of Waza. It's not the focus of Budishin, but maybe you could talk about how you envision that and what self-developmental aspects may be there.
Okay. Budishin Jiu-Jitsu, it's oriented around street self-defense. And everything that Seki taught, everything that I teach, is for street attacks. Early on, I also ran across a gentleman by the name of Harold Brocious, who had a different style of jiu-jitsu called Kitsugo. That integrated very well into Budishin. Hal was he reminded me, his appearance and sense of humor was just like Buddy Hackett. For those of you who are old enough to remember Buddy Hackett. He, like many top sensei, had, for lack of a better phrase, a warped sense of humor. Yes, even Wally J had a sense of humor. If you got to know him. And so in essence, I take the attitude and try to get my students to accept that there are no rules in self-defense except survival. And there are techniques that may not be the nicest things to use. And I've seen some systems where they say, well, you can't do that. And my attitude was, well, if you're on the street and you have to defend yourself, rules don't apply. It's who survives. And that's the key. and you don't do that by following rules. But in any case, that's one aspect. The other thing that Tom alluded to, which was the freestyle kata competition. We always had to train down for that. Because again, you're stuck with rules, not too many, but there were rules. And the advantage of that was it gave the students the well, other than they could shake and show off a bit. What it did, which was part of our training, was to be able to react spontaneously to unknown random attacks, because that's what you're going to be part of the fun. That's what you're going to be hit with on the street. It just gave them an opportunity to go for a minute and a half of just attacks and deal with them. In terms of the real world, I've had several students who have been in street situations, who've been attacked. It's usually over in 5 to 7 seconds. And the attacker is down, injured, or incapacitated. I'm not going to go into individual stories. The only thing to mention that is of value is that, particularly with young people, they would come back to me and tell me what happened, and say, and the technique worked. But what upset them was that they actually hurt somebody. They actually injured. We're talking fractures, concussions, dislocations, things of this sort. They were upset that they had hurt someone. And so I had to spend time with them, just trying to get them to realize that they were okay and they didn't do anything wrong. And so that's if you run into students who've had to use it on the street, that can be one of their really legitimate heavy duty concerns. And it's the reality of the street is a very, how do you say, it's an educational process. And if you've had it as a sensei, and I've been in a few situations where you've had to use what you have learned, you have an understanding of what goes through the minds of students sometimes. So I just wanted to mention that. That's one of the, how do you say, one of the consequences of defending yourself successfully. It's always been a humbling experience for them. They've never said, I beat the crap out of this person, I'm so happy, yada, yada, yada. I've never had a response like that from any person who's been in a street situation. It's a very humbling experience. And they learn a lot from it, and they develop a much greater self-respect for themselves and for their art.
Yeah.
And they also thank me, which is nice.
I'm sure seeing that it's I'm sure an emotionally ambivalent situation where having to use physical force against someone else, it's more complicated than getting a sense of feeling entirely justified and having it be black and white.
Yeah. I don't look at it as physical force. As a school teacher, we had one of the schools I was at, we had a lot of problems with adults and schoolers coming on campus to beat up on our kids. And this is before you had campus police. And we had our own security team. But in any case, I've even had, administrators ask me, how have you been able to do this for so long and never get in trouble? And I said, the secret is leave no marks. And I use a lot of, joint locks, a lot of nerve and pressure points, things of that sort, because I found that's all that was really needed in most situations. You don't have to throw the person on the ground and get down there and keep them pinned. You don't want to keep them pinned on the ground. You're dead meat down there. But
Yep.
I think that's the key is to, be whatever you use to make sure it's reasonable.
Yeah, very, very well put. Mark, I know the cane is a vast subject. I grabbed a couple canes in light of some of the discussion earlier. This is a Cane Masters cane. This one happens to have a one of these extension or these exercise.
Exercise bands.
Yeah. And yeah, resistance bands can be attached to practically any stick, but this is ingeniously devised to be part of a cane, and this cane itself is very beautifully made. So this kind of encompasses the exercise part of what you do and the flexibility part, along with the self-defense aspect. And here's an example of I was talking about canes with pointed horns. This is not a cane you made, Mark, but an example of one with this extremely sharp horn that is pretty persuasive, I'm sure, in many situations. But
They'll go anywhere you want.
yeah. So tell us about the cane.
It's a hook for the nooks.
Right.
Well, to get back where I was, seniors are being attacked. Like I said, it's up 70% right now because of this COVID crap that's going around. But when I first started doing the cane, it was just strictly self-defense. I didn't think about anything else until I started going out to senior citizen centers, and most of the seniors weren't strong enough to pick up a cane and swing it. So I had to come up with an exercise system. And the exercise system I came up with, you can do standing, sitting, or laying down. And it has a lot of yoga in it and a lot of band work. So it can keep you strong and flexible. Yoga changed my entire martial arts life. I went from an average guy to, don't want to brag, but I was unbeatable for about 4 or 5 years. And it was a lot of fun. And the seniors are scared to death of picking up a cane. So I'm trying to make them happy and do what they can. Most of the people nowadays aren't attacked by one person. You're attacked by 3 or more people. So when I try to train, I try to tell them, just don't practice going straight ahead or right or left. Practice all sides all the way around you, because that's important. Because like they had a little gang in Reno, and there was 4 of them, and one of them was a little busty girl, and the guy would see the girl, his focus would go to her, and then he get knocked behind the head or whatever. Different story. But nowadays, getting attacked by one person is pretty rare, from my understanding. I don't know how it is over on the East Coast, but everything. I mean, I was hassled by 6 guys a few years back. That's a different story too.
Yeah.
But cane is, when you get over 70, 35% of the people that fall do not get back up again. So I had to start training people how to balance. So I have a complete balancing system with a cane. And so that's why I came with some different names like Cane Chi. That's all exercise with a cane. It has nothing to do with self-defense. I have a lot of stuff that just learning it, like Cane Fu is just learning different techniques designed mainly for seniors. It has some exercise in it and some street techniques, but it doesn't really go for ranking. And then I have the black belt. I have the Silver Dragons, which I'm coming out in full force next month, and they're in November, I should say. And I'm known as Cane Masters, but I thought I sold just part of my system, which was making the canes. But this guy is a different story. Don't want to get into that. But I'm known as the Cane Master. I was known as the Grand Cane Master because I was the only one doing tournaments with a cane. I can't say the only one. I had a few people who were coming up against me, but most people, if they see a cane, they take a step back. They don't want to play with it. And to me, I have to go after the seniors to wake them up, because well, you can get that cane going over 300 miles an hour in a half a second.
Yeah, the purely the martial arts side of cane training, and I do some of this with Al also from the more Korean Chinese perspective. They're seeing the cane as a martial arts weapon and as something that's been used for centuries. And there's the approach of the formalized approach of going through kata and forms and advancing to do very sophisticated things with a cane. And that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of a spectrum is going into a seminar where you have people who are really using the cane for mobility issues, and they can barely lift it up. They have balance problems, and trying to bridge that gap or convey basic self-defense techniques to that audience of physically limited people can be a challenge. So there's a vast audience for it, and finding that adaptation is pretty critical.
Well, I know when I started, I couldn't believe the statistics I was getting. Over 40% of women are attacked sometime in their life. I was teaching some CIA and FBI ladies in New York, and we started talking. It was only an hour and a half seminar, but they said, and that's just the ones they know about. And the seniors, they're up to about 60% being attacked. Now it's going crazy.
Yeah.
Because the laws are gone. It's, you know, the world's going crazy right now anyway. But so I think that's why I have a just classes just for exercise, just for stretching, getting your balance back, and for health. And then there's the techniques, which is helping a lot of people, not only from people, but from dogs.
Yes. No
And
question.
it's just smart to carry because they can't even ask you why you carry a cane. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And you get on planes first, you get the front seat if you want it, especially on Southwest. But it's a hell of a tool, and it's the only one. What other tool do we have out there that we could carry anywhere and not be questioned about it? Just a thought. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a gigantic selling point, and it makes it, as you've said many times, why it hasn't been considered as the primary self-defense device when it's something you can carry in plain sight and has so many other qualities. I don't know. I'm trying to spread the word as you know, and as I've been guilty of boring other people with like bringing up the cane at every opportunity. And
you go to a senior, they take a step back once you say cane. That's going to make me look old and weak. I said, no,
that
it
could be an
won't.
advantage, right? That's that lack of expectation that you can use it as something to defend yourself can be surprising and good.
Just learn how to walk with it properly to scare the hell out of most people.
True.
Everybody look at the can. They're walking down with their head down. Little teeny steps. So go ahead.
Yeah, right. It's the like whip me again, or here I am a victim as the weak bent over cane person versus the more assertive posture you can assume with the cane. So anyway, that's a long story. In the interest of time, we've got, I know we said this would go to 12. I am in no rush to move on here. If you others have obligations, I'll understand that, but I'll start combining a few of these questions to try to get through them as expeditiously as possible. But Alessandro, as you developed Full Circle Jiu-Jitsu, where did you find techniques to integrate into it? I think you touched on this earlier, different styles of jiu-jitsu. I know there's a Filipino element, and I'm not sure if that falls under the Full Circle Jiu-Jitsu rubric, or whether that's a separate part of what you do, or maybe you can tell us. Yeah.
I've been doing Eskrima Serrata for the last 20 years now, and it actually became a creeping influence into the jiu-jitsu style as well. But what I realized is that the great grandfather of our jiu-jitsu style was done by a Filipino man, Professor Visitacion, and he was an arnis proponent as well, which was actually his first style of martial arts. So when I started studying Filipino martial arts, I realized a lot of the distancing in terms of the empty hand techniques were the same. And they actually integrated very well with the parent style that I come from. So in discovering that, there are a few things that bled in over, particularly some hand motions. But given that jiu-jitsu and Filipino martial arts are both developed by weapon stylists, that the distancing between a hand and a weapon was very similar on top of that. So that sort of came and creeped in. And other than that, it's mostly just the jiu-jitsu, mostly sort of codified. I guess you could sort of call us Aiki jiu-jitsu, though I don't really like that label because we're not truly an Aiki style. Though people do call us that from time to time because of our emphasis on joint locking, Kotegaeshi, Nikkyo, Sankyo, et cetera, so forth. And we basically are very open-minded in terms of how we approach. My first sensei, Master Zulu, was a very conceptual teacher. So we work off a very conceptual base, but with a really strong technical foundation, which is different than what he did. He was more of a conceptual base, not so much of a technical foundation. And I decided we really need a strong technique on top of that. And it works out really well for us.
Interesting. Thank you. Al, you sort of got into this earlier, but the various influences into Hanguk Musul. And I know you started off, I believe, in the harder, more linear styles of Tang Soo Do and the punching and kicking involved in Taekwondo, but then integrated Hapkido and other grappling styles. How did you choose? How did you evolve Hanguk Musul into something coherent?
I think it kind of chose me. I don't know if I chose it, just by getting exposure to it and being in the right places at the right time, and then having a master who was respected in that community, in one of the old timers, and then getting to meet some of the other masters. Now, one of them in particular was Master Sun Hyuk. He was a founder of Kuk Sool. I think most people have heard of it. Itself is a composite system of about 31 different styles. And with him, he primarily inherited it from his grandfather. But, you know, training with him and his people and hanging with them and just being able to appreciate the wide variety of systems and techniques that they had incorporated kind of was inspiring as well. And then, of course, learning Kuksowan, which is just another pronunciation, Kuk meaning national, you know, or Guk, however you want to pronounce it. But yeah, so on that note, just seeing firsthand the benefits of it, because if you look at the reality aspect of it, how it, you know, translates to self-defense, you just can't be one thing or the other. You just can't pummel somebody, and it may be a time where you just can't even grapple. So I think you have to be well versed. Bruce Lee was big in that way of thinking, and he also understood ranges and zones. And I think all that sometimes gets neglected, because if your style is like you have a certain parameters or rules that dictate, you know, you do this or that, you kind of limit yourself of what else you could be doing. So I think you need to be, you know, well balanced. So that's, you know, the hard aspects, which are the kicking and the punching and the grappling aspects, as well as understanding weaponry and improvised weapons. And because if you're well versed and well trained, anything you pick up in your hand is a weapon. And it can be just a stick, any kind of, you know, field expedient type thing.
And so can your hand.
Exactly. And so that's where my thinking was. I'm sure a lot of the old timers here share the same thoughts. And there are no rules in fighting, as we know. My thing is just winning. And particularly as you get older, I don't want to take an ass beating. So I'll do what I can do to get home to the family.
I never wanted to take an ass beating, but anyway, different.
At any age, yeah.
I did when I was younger.
Regardless of age. Yeah, George, you touched on a lot of these issues earlier, but and you mentioned the influence of Secchi, of course, and Harold Brosius. I guess, was there a selection process? How did you decide to codify or not codify, or how did you integrate these influences?
Good question. I kind of followed the way Secchi did belt promotions, which was you were around long enough, therefore you learned X number of techniques, and he had I don't know, he had good criteria for promotion, but nobody knew what they were. But that's very old school. If he felt you were a certain point, you got a promotion, and he never asked people. He just promoted you. I didn't have to do this until I wanted to start teaching jujitsu as a PE elective in the school district where I worked for. And then they want to know goals, objectives, and what skills have to be learned, et cetera. So that became the belt exams. And that was the first, that would be in the mid 70s when I had to start writing this stuff down. It's been through several evolutions and changes, and as I tell my students, nothing is written in cement. And there are times when I still look at the belt requirements and say, well, maybe this should be moved there, that should be moved here, or I'll get comments from my upper belts that, you know, what could be done to improve it. So that's, if you want to call codification, that's it. I know other Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu dojo have modified them. And that's okay. I'm not going to fight those battles. They've mixed other arts into it. And again, if it works, fine. My only concern is that by the time the person gets to black belt, there is a common core of knowledge, and as long as that's in place, I'm happy. You know how you get there. There are many. There are many different paths up the mountain, and I'm not a person to say there's only one way to get there.
I've got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
With my black belts, I make them make up their own kata. That lets me know their brain's in the right place and everything else. Maybe that doesn't make me traditional, but I have the eight katas they have to learn to get the black, but I also add that I want to see a kata they design themselves, because everybody's body's different. And sometimes, especially when you have to carry a cane, you can't do techniques other people can do. So I have them make up their own kata, which I think it helps them a lot too. It makes their brain think about what to do and how to fight people. But just kind of throw that. I don't know if that's. I had some people say you can't make your own katas up, and I said, well, I know God didn't make up all these. Let's go for it.
Okay, and in I'll say in Budo Shinjitsu, because there are a rule of jujitsu that will disagree with me. For us, a kata is a specific technique, and then waza is when you're putting everything together.
Oh, okay.
By the time a person is at black belt, you can see that they are emphasizing certain techniques that are more suitable to their body type, age, skill level, etc. And I don't look for everyone to be the same. That is just not going to happen.
It sure isn't.
How do you say it, for lack of a better phrase? God didn't make us all the same. And
not even close.
And you're right. And so by the time a person is a black belt, not only do they know the core movements, but they've modified them to suit their own skill level. And to my thinking, ultimately, that's what any person has to do in any martial art in order to make it effective for self-defense. It has to work for you. There are techniques that I teach that I know Seki taught. Neither Hai nor I would ever use them on the street till, they're great for concept. And, this is, or to present a theory, but as far as street use, no way. Just an example, he would, to get people just to reach out, that's a very difficult task for a lot of people. So what he would do, instead of saying, you need to reach out to get to their body or to move them, he would simply put dollar bills around the mat. And he'd say, just pick up the dollar bill. That's what you do when you're going to move into somebody. You just move into them. You don't think about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to use $5 or $10 bills now, but
That's of inflation.
But
There's no inflation. Ask Biden. Anyway,
in any case, that's a worthless technique to teach in terms of actual self-defense, but it gets an idea across. So people do adjust the art to meet their own capabilities.
They have to, yeah.
You have to. So there are techniques where you have to do certain things to make the technique work. I look at those, but there are, and part of I'm going to sidetrack here, but Seki used a lot of generic terminology. For Teinagi, he must have 30 or 40 different techniques that he calls Teinagi, or the other term is there's a newer term. Teinagi is hand technique. I can't think of the newer Japanese term.
Tewaza?
What? No. Tewaza is hand techniques.
Yeah.
Teinagi is hand throw. So he had maybe 20 or 30 or 40 different Tewaza. And if I'm doing a black belt exam, I'll ask the student, do a Tewaza. And sometimes they'll say, which one? And I'll say, I don't care, whatever one works best for you. And that's a hard concept for some students to accept, because they, part of it's our public school system, I think, which I was a part of, is that, they're trying to get you all to think come up with the correct answer, and everyone has to come up with the same answer. But that doesn't work in life.
And it doesn't work with every physique, and it doesn't work with every body size, and
right.
If you're in a wheelchair or not. Yeah.
So it's a the terminology messes some people up for a while, particularly if they're coming in from another system. and they switch over to Budoshin because they want to use specific terms for specific techniques. And I'll say, I need to see a Iposionagi. And they'll say, Sensei, which one? And I'll say, I know at least half a dozen or a dozen variations on it. And it doesn't matter to me. Do what? and
Exactly.
So I'm not trying to give, I'm not trying to give, where do you go?
Oh, you're looking.
All right, who did I lose? Oh, I lost Mark. I'm not trying to give
No,
Mark. I'm not
I'm
trying
right
to.
here.
Yeah, I know.
I
I'm
should still be here.
not trying to give
I
Mark
think I'm here.
enough time.
Yeah,
This is,
That's me.
in Budoshin Jitsu, you don't have katas as you would in karate, or some of the other martial art, harder martial arts. I've seen, there is one system of jiu-jitsu where I've seen where they go through a kata, a whole series of techniques. But the particular style, I won't mention it. I also said they probably couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag, because there's so much cooperation, and the techniques have become so artsy.
Little like Aikido demonstrations, some Aikido.
I won't even insult and see Aikido with that, but because there are some Aikido. There's one person now who's or in the past that I've worked with, and their uke, the tori is doing the techniques correctly, but the uke is so into what the tori is doing that it's like 150% cooperation. So I've kind of told him, I said, have your uke cooperate less. I need to see, I need to see that you are doing the technique correctly without the uke cooperating with you to the extent that it makes it look perfect. So, and that can be a philosophical argument too, but I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, and just in the interest of everyone's time, it's we've gone for a little over an hour, and I'm fine if there's anyone who has to go, or maybe you could raise a hand or just say that you have to go, because I'm thinking we've got plenty more questions. I could easily go, and I hope you could, for maybe a half an hour more. Does that?
Yeah, half an hour is okay. We can also, if after half an hour, because we're beyond most people's attention span anyway. We might.
Maybe we can do this again in a month or so after people start watching this thing and make it regular. Get a whole bunch of other people involved in this stuff.
That's if you're willing. Absolutely.
Yeah. You may want to just say, okay, we'll continue on in a couple, 3 weeks, or do this again next week and pick up where we left off.
I think it keep it going and interesting, and add a couple extra students.
Yes, and that happens all the time in your calls, George, where it's you get involved in a deep, interesting discussion, and you feel it doesn't do it justice by going on for another hour when people are not going to be listening that long anyway. So let's aim to go on for a half an hour, and then if you gentlemen are interested in doing this in the future, we can address related issues or look for come up with our own questions, because I think this is a fascinating group with a lot of different backgrounds. If that works, then we'll continue doing this. Is that?
I think that's a good idea, because there's a real diversity here, and I think you ought to go into competition with my Zoom stuff, but that's okay.
We'll do it on the weeks when we're not doing.
I mean, that's the purpose of the media, is to make it accessible, and so go for it.
A lot of you have been going to various. You've been doing a lot of traveling. I know you have, Mark. With you had there was a Hall of Fame thing or something in Texas, I guess it was, but yeah, traveling is becoming crazy. And this is a challenging time of year to get any group of people together because of so much vacation time. But this is great. We'll continue. Yeah. Mark, maybe you could answer the same sort of question where and I know this intimately as somebody who's been working through your kata. How did you develop these kata? Where did your influences come from? I know Hapkido is probably the one more common martial art that integrates a lot of cane work at a certain level. Where did you get your cane kata? How did you develop them?
Well, to be honest with you, right off the bat, I hated katas. In fact, I failed my red belt test on katas. I was fighting one of Pat Johnson's private students. He was about a head taller than me. I wiped him all over the mat. I thought this was going to be easy. Went to katas. My katas sucked. I mean, I didn't even like katas, and they passed him and failed me. I'm going, shit. I used the guy as a wash rag on the mat, which I thought martial arts was mostly for fighting and stuff, and everybody's going after katas. So when I started getting into the cane, I said, shit, someone's got to make up some katas. And I just started making them. Now the katas that are on the testing thing, I had some help from Cliff Crandall and his gang over there in New York. He's a very amazing martial artist also, but he helped me put my second black belt program all together. So it was more technical and stuff. I never thought I'd be a black belt. I didn't, I never even thought about it till I went around looking for places to work out. And I said, let's try this martial arts stuff. Because back in my day, when I was doing most of my fighting, it was, you were a dirty fighter if you used your feet. So I didn't get heavy into martial arts until I was about 22 after I got out of the Army. So that's, I kind of missed the question. I'm going.
Yeah. I mean, you've got 100 techniques that are part of the
more
black
than
belt.
that. That's just a few. And in fact, when I'm doing a lot of testing now, I'm saying we got 100 there you're supposed to know, but just show me your favorite ones. The ones that are going to work.
Yes.
And you don't want to know 100 techniques. You want to know 10 techniques. You got 100 techniques, and your brain won't be able to mix on there. So I have stuff they have to do. I don't give blacks any belts away. I think you have to earn them. Like right now, I don't want to piss anybody off, but giving a 5-year-old kid a black belt is not right. It's not right at all. That's different subject. But you have to with the cane, you have to also teach them balancing. A lot of these guys can't walk. And I start spinning the cane. I have some people say spinning the cane is a waste of time. No, it's not. Not at all. You know how to spin it properly. And
we're changing the direction.
You learn stuff using that crook. Most of them don't use the crook. We use that crook, and you can throw people anywhere you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a lot to the cane, and I just have the almost the bare minimum going for a black belt as far as I'm concerned, because there's so much out there you can learn.
Yeah, and anyone who's worked with the cane, or I guess any implement, once you start experimenting with techniques, and this happens during seminars where you think, well, this would work if you're demonstrating how to do something against someone's scapula or some part of the back. You think, well, wait, you could also do this, and it just kind of multiplies the flexibility of the cane, especially with the using the crook as a device to attack or to secure a limb. And you think, well, this is a creative process, and this has happened with in my classes with Al, where we've used the cane, and obvious uses of it kind of become clear once you start using it just as a more ad-libbed freestyle kind of atmosphere. So that's a really important point. So let's see, Alessandro, and this is the crux issue that inspired this whole discussion, I think, and it's a big issue, is succession and your styles as you go forward and into the future. And we talked, George mentioned that the Seki had an atmosphere of where promotions were very subjective, where it's the master assessing a student after years and years of knowing that student, getting to know them, versus the codification. And if you desire to spread the word about or perpetuate your style, there has to be some structure that goes beyond that subjective quality. How do you, Alessandro, how do you see that? How do you see things going forward?
Well, I went through the same issue. My purple belt promotion literally was in the urinal, with my sensei standing right next to me saying, by the way, go buy your purple belt. And that's sort of how I came up with it, which is very arbitrary in terms of when he decided he just got promoted. So as a result, there was no real curriculum that he put forth in terms of like, here, this is when this happens, this is when that happens. It sort of was really up to his judgment. So that's always been an issue as well, too, as to how to, sort of have this codified in a way that she could pass it on. So we're still always working on that constantly as a result. And it's sort of a natural evolution. I don't think it should be completely dogmatic, and I think it should change over time. And I think you should be able to have something that's pass onable on top of it. So it isn't so much the work that I do, but what is the work that my students do? How did their students perform? And that's really the test as far as I'm concerned. So it's working out pretty well so far. And I'm noticing that the students now from 20 years ago until the students to today do have a lot in common, and they could actually have a common core in which they could work out with if they met up. Just say they just somehow had a time machine and they met up together, they could all train together. However, the students today do have things that the students 20 years ago didn't have in terms of things that have just come up along the way and things we've integrated. So it's, that's always a work in progress as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I know you've got at least one book called
Yeah.
Full Circle Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, which actually sits right next to this book right here,
I read that.
which was a huge influence, by the way, Professor Kirby.
That's probably worth at least
Yeah.
$400 or $500 at this point.
Yeah, I bought it for $4.98 at the time. When I got it.
That is a great classic. So you've got your book, and I have not read the book, but in terms of the material, the technical parts of Full Circle Jiu-Jitsu, is that captured in some permanent form, or how is that perpetuated? I know George has a really coherent example where if someone says, what's Budishin Jiu-Jitsu, you can say, well, here are these. You have the big book, you have videos, you have YouTube recording, YouTube footage. How is your style perpetuated, Alessandro?
Yeah, so there basically is, there's nothing that's out there in the public other than the book. The book is more of a philosophical rambling and just sort of my ideas about martial arts and just things that have happened along the way and stories of my teachers and such. Very nonlinear narrative, I guess you could say, and very, very quick read on top of that. In terms of everything else, basically it's mostly done by video these days since it's so easy to shoot. We all have a supercomputer in our pocket with a high definition video camera. So we basically film a lot, and I love video editing. So I'm able to put those things together and just sort of have something up for the students. I have a students page in particular that they'll have access to, that they can actually download video if they need to, or just watch it. A lot of private YouTube links as well. And that's pretty much how it's happening now. There are student manuals as well that we write, but again, they're always in flux. They're always being updated. They're always being refined. They have version numbers on them even just to keep track of what we're doing. And yeah, basically it's just very modern way of doing it, which is just sort of like when we need to film, we film, and we need to update, we update, and I splice in the new footage when need be instead of reshooting the whole thing. Pretty much that's it.
That's huge. That's so helpful, and it's a vastly complicated topic because and Al is the next person who's we're gonna talk to. I having been through 20 years of knowing Al and Al's own history, which is focused on very old texts sometimes, where there's the physical challenge of you've got this deep history in the history of Korea and China, and having some visual guidance, and then how do you update that? I know in Al's case you've got manuals, and there are also videos to some extent, but keeping up with current technology and videos, I found, especially if you're doing kata, as I've been doing with Mark, with cane work, where you're doing individual work, I don't think there's a better way, unless you're physically working with someone face to face. Videos are hugely helpful, and they give you a much more coherent vision of what a technique is about than anything in written form, because it's dynamic. Al, you and I have talked about this. What are your views on that? And you've got copious amounts of manuals and you've got some videos, but how do you see it going forward and developing in the future, Hanguk and Sul?
Well, I like the 21st century, but having said that, I'm a low tech person, so I got to rely on other people to do this, stuff. I like Facebook. I know Facebook has a lot of issues, but I just like that medium and being able to put stuff up. So we put a lot more content up on Facebook. But like you said, for home learning, I think it's best. You have a tape, you can rewind it, and you can look at the nuances of it. Does it explain everything? No, but I think you get the gist of it. I don't think it's ever going to replace a real human being that can tell you all the ins and outs and applications and what have you. But I think we as martial artists should, join the 21st century and A lot of people don't read printed media anymore. That's the thing. I like a book. I've got George's book. I've got a lot of the old timers books, and I think they're great classics. I like to have it in my hand, look at it and digest it. There's just something about it, but I'm very old fashioned. But I think videos are the future, DVDs, things like that. And plus, as an instructor, if you do your own videos, you can critique yourself and also share it with others, like they can see it. So that's kind of where I'm coming with. So I try to just, be the best that I can be to help other people be the best that they can be, and use whatever's available towards that end.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
yeah, George, you're next up. The question of face-to-face learning. That's of course, the historical ideal. You have ongoing contact with an instructor face-to-face. It can the nature of the martial art, I think, also can make a difference. If it's heavily kata or form-based, there's a lot more you can do individually by looking at videos. In the case of Kane with Grandmaster Shui, that's the kata is all able to be done at least on a basic level by watching videos. But then there are a lot of refinements that might come by working face to face with somebody who's has mastered those. With jiu-jitsu, there is the physical, tactile aspect of it that I don't know that's able to be replicated in the same way. And maybe, George, you can speak to that, because you've done a lot of videos, you've done plenty of YouTube stuff. How much can you get out of that? How do you see that kind of working with the face-to-face thing and going forward?
Okay. Getting them, how do you say it? They need the tactile experience, and that's the key, I think, to success in any martial art. The videos show the techniques, okay, and some of them, even other martial arts, are very good, but I don't think any of them teach. And I don't even think the word teach is the correct word. You have to be able to feel techniques to make sure they're working correctly. And that's one of the hardest concepts to get students to get. I know I put out supplemental videos, fine-tuning videos, and all of those help. But to make this technique work, you have to develop a feel for the technique. One of the things I'll do with my new student, I'll try to do with my new students, and eventually they get it, is I tell them, stop looking at the technique you're trying to set up. Stop looking at your training partner's face to see if they're in pain. Set the technique up. Does it feel right? And then turn or move in the direction you're supposed to. Ignore the attacker per se. And once they get that concept, then they really start relying on that tactile aspect in order to make techniques work, because that's the only way they're going to work on the street. Upper belts sometimes, and I've done a couple of seminars, a couple of you may have been in them, where I hand out blindfolds. They're really cheap on Amazon. And I usually buy them by bag of 50, and I say, now the attacker isn't going to wear this, the person defending themselves is, and you're going to be limited to techniques where their attacks are body contact, grabs, chokes, no hits, no kicks, stuff like that. And they eventually get pretty good because they realize they don't have to rely on their eyesight to make a technique work. They can do it by feel, by touch. And some of them have a balance issue once you put blindfolds on them, because you lose your visual, you do not have a visual reference.
Yeah.
And for upper belts, that's a great way to get them to rely on touch and balance and all sorts of things. If you start blindfolding your students, the only real caution is they need to slow down with their technique execution, because since they aren't watching what they're doing, many times they don't realize how fast they are going.
I don't recommend that with a cane.
Oh, no.
Just teasing, just teasing.
No. Yeah, but that's probably the biggest safety hazard in blindfolding the Tory is that they need, I say, that visual sort of reference, even though because they can't see, they can't judge how fast they're moving.
Yeah.
And they do speed up a lot. And so that's the only caution I have with blindfolding students, but it's a great practice, and they actually find they enjoy it once they get into it, because they're amazed at what they can do blindfolded.
Absolutely. And you imagine the relevance, the practical relevance of being attacked on the street in darkness,
Right.
or in a house where for one reason or another, you're in a darkened room and someone comes in, and it's the dojo context of having mats, a soft landing place and well-lit area and comfort and all that stuff is just not always possible on the street. And that's a big blind spot with a lot of training, I think. And
Right. But just saying, the other aspect is if you're going to do this blindfolded, you only have, I don't know how much mat space you have, but they need a lot of mat space because they don't have a visual reference of where they're at.
yes,
So that's the other safety concern is don't have them do this stuff in a closet because their uke will not get up.
right. Exactly. And so, George, the last, I'll ask you to clarify one thing, and then we'll move on to Mark. And I think because we're closing in on an hour and a half, we can wrap it up there and then make plans to do this again in the next month or so, depending on availability of people. And there are plenty of unaddressed issues and complexities that we could get into. And if you're all interested, we could definitely gather again. But the question I have as one to wrap up is succession planning. And old school, the examples I know are often of the East Asian martial arts master who has where there's a family interest, where his son will be appointed the next master of the style, or there's someone in line to be succeeding that person and to carry on the style. Now things with technology are much more, I think the choices are more if you have a coherent example of what, or you have a coherent compilation of what an art is and can distribute it, that opens up a lot of opportunities. But in terms of the human succession thing, how does that work for you, George? I mean, you founded the AJA, you've got hundreds or thousands of people, you've taught hundreds of probably Udansha level instructors. How do you see things going forward in terms of your style and the idea of succession?
I think because, and I consider myself very fortunate to have all the media out there that I do. And that all started from walking down the hall with the Black Belt magazine editor one day and running into the publisher. And she said, he introduced me to her, and she said, I'm looking at another book for jiu-jitsu. Would you be interested in submitting a proposal? And I said, sure. And that was just a matter of coincidence that, two people met in the hallway, and this is what developed. I hope my system will continue in some form or manner. I've got a lot of good black belts. I've got some great ones out there too. Dave Clark is is one of my top black belts. I mean, because he's been very creative. He's done modifications. That's okay, there are some sensei who I know will continue the system. Okay. I'd love to be able to say, and my only real disappointment is that there, like you said, there may be hundreds of black belts out there. Very few of them are actually teaching. And that you know, that to me is
And
just,
a lot of them shouldn't be teaching.
I mean, but you know, for all of us, it would be nice if all of our black belts were teaching, had their own dojos, all this other stuff, yada, 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 but that's not a reality. Because it takes a certain attitude and certain perseverance to be a sensei and to stick around as a sensei. And all of you know that. This is one thing I'm having to consider in terms of, I'm 78 now. If I look at my family history, I've probably about 6-8 more years in really good health, and then I'll kick the bucket really fast, hopefully. But moving right along, and hopefully I'll last longer.
Try to keep doing these calls, George.
But yeah, in any case, I've got a Densho that's out there, and I've gotten some flack from some people by making it available to all of my black belts, rather than having it available only to my successor. And I think part of that is due to the technology that exists today. If you want to keep a system secret, good luck.
Precisely. And that's,
It's not going to happen. And so
Yeah.
you've just got to have it out there, and those people that want it will take it, and those people who don't won't. And I think that's a real change in the martial arts, particularly in the Western world, I'd say.
no question. And that's a perfect segue into Mark's situation. Given what I've experienced with Kane, the study of Kane, but just to clarify, the Densho by Densho, George, that's your big book, that the comprehensive.
Right. There are I think in jiu-jitsu, there are maybe 40 to 50 basic moves, core movements. And I don't even know what they all are per se. But the Densho is a compilation mainly of Seki's techniques and some of Hal Brocious' techniques. And there are about 850 techniques and variations. No, I haven't memorized them all.
But it's all there. It's everything.
It's all there for someone who wants it, and it's codified, and it's cross-referenced to videos and to the books, et cetera, et cetera. And I felt as I did that was very important, because you have to have more than one way of seeing something.
Yeah. Excellent point. That's the other aspect of the hard copy versus video. Like you can, I've experienced this with Al, where it's mostly hard copy, and then video will illustrate some transition that you can't possibly get from the written version.
The video can show you how to do it. The book may help explain how to do it, and getting a one-on-one or maybe a video fix on some aspect of a technique will improve your ability to do that technique. So it's always going to be a multiple approach.
Yes.
And different, I mean, I teach some techniques differently from how I learned them. If I get to do my next book, which is going to be, I think theoretically I've entitled it Jiu-Jitsu Okuden, which is all this, the stuff that really isn't visible, but there are, I don't want to call them secrets to techniques, but there are a lot of small things that just are missed. And I even know in my books and the videos, they aren't there, or you can't pick up on them. So the nice thing about the modern world, or the technology, is that there are so many different ways to get information across, that some means will work better than other means for different people.
Precisely. And it's there in video form. I'm, as a 55-year-old, video started with VHS tapes, moving on to maybe DVDs, moving on to something that's less tangible, to an MP4. There's always going to be that changing technology, but if it's in one form, and I know this through Al, where you've got something on video, I guess VHS that's translatable to DVD, that's translatable to something else, as long as the visual imagery is able to go on, that's the key thing.
Okay.
Mark, and I know I want to respect.
One more thing.
Yeah.
This is a thumbstick. 1 terabyte thumbstick. Everything I have on jujitsu will fit on this one thumbstick.
Same.
Yep.
And
It's all
that's,
right here, right now.
I mean, you wonder where things will be in 10 years. But the point is,
I'm going virtual with everything. Up where I am, I can't have a dojo anymore. It's all touristry, and the prices on getting this stuff, I got to start all over again. About 80% of the schools are closed in California and Nevada.
yeah, I mean, it's
So I'm going TV.
Yeah.
but
How
it's,
does that is a brilliant illustration, George, having something. I mean, there's the 1 inch or whatever, 1 inch by half an inch time capsule kind of coherence that you get with that. Like this is Buddhist Jiu-Jitsu. This represents everything that I've done, and at least in martial arts, and this encompasses everything. That's a brilliant illustration, and it shows how it can be in one place. And the next step is there's even the less tangible fact that everything is on the internet, everything is online,
Right.
and there's that sense of permanence with that.
One thing I can tell you is that I have a student who's an ER doctor. And he told me something very surprising. He said, well, I had a case come in last night. This guy had a knife in a very strange place on his body. And he said he went back to his office and he went onto YouTube and found out what to do. And I said, you can do that? He said, yeah, as long as you have the technical foundation.
Could you try it again?
Siri, no one's talking to you. What are you talking? My assistant here is talking. So you get the idea is that even at that level, as long as he has the technical foundation, the YouTube video can help him do what he does naturally anyway. So he was actually able to save a lot of lives just through going on.
You
YouTube.
need that third
Yes.
eye on you though. Too.
But you have to have the foundation, without it,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
work at all.
Absolutely. Mark, maybe you can close us out on the idea of your techniques, your system going forward. And I know you've been incredibly generous in that you've got the American cane system, but there's the adaptability that other people have where they've taken a lot of your core knowledge and adapted it and sometimes renamed it. How do you feel about your legacy?
Well, I hope I get noticed. I mean, I couldn't believe that no one had a cane system in the martial arts in 2,000 years, but it'd be nice if they did that. But most of these guys, their ego, they're full of themselves. Hate to say that. There's a few out there that really promote me, and other ones say that he did it or their master did it. But I said, just show me some writing. Nobody put anything in writing or on film. And to me, that you have to have it in writing or film to have your legacy follow. So that's why I got the manuals going. I'm going with I want to go TV, and everything's going to be recorded. So if a guy's late to a class, he can just push a button and see what we did. And I'll have all my DVDs on the same thing. So that you have a complete dojo right there. I'm trying to get about 10 instructors together, and we'll all do it at a real fair price, and just everybody does their own thing. I'll wake the students up. The other guy will teach katas, the other guy will teach techniques, the other guy will teach anything that the cane does. The cane can go so many different directions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just having a balancing class, 30% of people, like I said, over 70 that fall don't get up. People got to take balance classes. I've lost 3 or 4 of them. I lost my dad because of balance. Different story. But yeah, you have to, there's so many different variables of the cane. I thought it was just self-defense until I got into it. And the exercise, teaching balance, teaching how to spin, you use all sections of your body. And then my biggest thing is the people, I try to get people over 40. I tell them, you got to walk, you got to move. You don't move, you rust. Because so many people retire, they sit and they die. So you have to get with it, get out and move. You don't move, you don't go very far.
Definitely. Yeah. The cane, the flexibility of the cane today, the universal relevance of it to so many things. There's a quotation that's connected to Musashi that as he was talking about the sword, of course, the Japanese sword, and he said the sword had to become more than a simple weapon. It had to become the answer to life's essential questions, and that underscored the spiritual side of the katana in Japanese culture. But cane, because you can carry a cane, it's more practical as a go-to device than a sword. Of course, the cane is an answer to many difficulties in flexibility, difficulties in mobility, and as in its martial arts capacity, that the cane is a good substitute in many ways for
Very versatile, that's for sure.
Yeah. We've gone for an hour, over an hour and a half, and I think now is probably a good time to wrap things up. And thank you again, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey,
All right, thank you for this, Tom. It's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll put the
thank-
recording up.
thank You, Tom, you've done an excellent job here and hope these continue.
Yeah,
I think every month or so, once a month, would probably keeping people out of trouble.
that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
If there's other interest, I mean, I'll invite all of you. Maybe if you'd like to submit your own questions, if there are things you'd like to extend from this discussion, we can do that. I can come up with some, whatever you'd like. But this is, speaking of a resource going forward, as something that perpetuates legacies. I think this is, to get this level of talent together regularly to discuss these things is tremendously valuable. So thank you again. And I will be in touch with a copy of this footage, and then we'll go from there and aim for something like a month to get together.
Great. I love it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Thomas, for putting it together. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.